We're here today with Dr. Kevin Abdur-Rahman, and he's going to talk a little bit about his latest book, The Eruption of Possible, to burst from the limits of environment. So first, Kevin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You can go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, about your book.
Well, actually, my book, as I was kind of explaining to you earlier, is kind of a sequel to my original book. So basically, I like to say a divorcee from the criminal justice system. I don't like to use the term ex-felon or whatever, because using those terms still connects you to what you did and not who you've become. So the basis of both my books are to try to demonstrate that in our society, no matter what you accomplish, I have a doctor of education degree, and I got, first of all, I guess I should say I spent 10 years in prison. I started selling drugs when I was about 14 or 15, and by the age of 23, I was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in Gradysford prison, which actually, I see you shaking your head, which actually was more of a blessing than a curse, in the long run. You know what I mean? When you think about the process of how things grow. So, and I talked to you earlier, I use in my book, The Eruption of Possible, the example of the butterfly. And as I said to you earlier, the reason why I don't like to use the term ex-felon or whatever, it's kind of like you never hear a butterfly referred to as a former caterpillar, because that part of their life is no longer exists. However, with former incarcerated or returning citizens, whatever you want to label us, what happens with us is that, and I'll give you an example of myself and another gentleman that I write about in my book, is that once I was released from prison after 10 years, I received a master's degree from Lincoln University in Human Services and a doctorate education degree from Temple University. And I spent 23 years at the City College of New York. I went from an assistant athletic director all the way to the director of athletics. During that 23 years, and I like to consider it a remarkable career and a remarkable experience. At some point in my 23rd year, they have these websites. I don't know if you're familiar with it. You pay $50 to them, and you can look up anybody's criminal history. So apparently, a student was on one of those websites and saw my name, and after 23 years, once it was discovered that I had a criminal history, and all the focus went from who I was and who I become and the impact that I made on that campus with the students to what I did. So it's not limited to me. And I talk about it in my book. It's over 20 million ex-felons, right? Out of that 20-something million ex-felons, 433,000 are business owners. Out of those business owners, 1.7 million people are employed by them.
Wow. So
this is a community that has to stay hidden, because as soon as your past is exposed, you're judged by what you did and not who you become.
Even though in like your case, you had been there for 23 years, proving yourself.
It didn't matter. It didn't matter. Now, it mattered to the students, because the students was who I interacted with the most, and they're the ones that I helped the most, and they're the ones who I developed a relationship. But the administration saw it as a black mark on them, which in my book I discuss. I say I didn't expect anything different from their reaction. My expectations and my hopes were different. I had hope that the school would see themselves as an environment where someone can resurrect their life and reform their life, and somehow maybe even start a program for ex-felons to get degrees. That did not happen, but so my expectations and my hopes were two different things for this incident to happen. So basically, that's what happened. Now, it'd be different if it was just limited to me. But there's 20-something million people, most of which, not all, but most of which have to hide their past. They have to, and understand the anxiety we deal with too. You have to fill out an application. You have to sit down and say, when you get to that question, if I say yes, I immediately shoot myself in the foot. And if I say no, it could come back to haunt me like it did myself. You know, I talk about a friend and a gentleman who spent time in prison, and as a juvenile, he had a homicide, and he was interviewed and getting ready to receive a job at one of the top 5 accounting firms in Philadelphia. And he decided that the burden was too heavy to carry around, so he wanted to get it off his chest up front. And he told the guy, the executive, about his past. And the executive said, I have a promise of employment letter in my pocket, but I can't give it to you now. So it's almost a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. This man went on to become the chairman of the board to the Jordan brand for the Nike corporation. And, you know, so if he went from an accounting job to becoming, he started the Jordan brand for Nike. So if he had that kind of potential, you understand what I'm saying? He had it then when the guy said, I can't hire you. So again, I use that as an example because him and I are kind of like both sides of the same coin. He tried to do it up front and that hurt him. I tried to keep it hidden and it finally caught up to me. I feel blessed in one situation is that I got a 23-year run. I got 23 years. I tell people, Al Capone and Lucky Luciano didn't get 23-year runs. You know what I mean? So I feel good about that. And the other side of the coin was my work was very rewarding because I was helping young people, help them direct their life into something bigger and better, and avoiding the potholes that life can give you.
So many different stories. Yours personally, it's a personal story, personal passion for you. You've lived it. It's part of your story.
Exactly. Right.
How did you get that, or what was there one thing that led to you writing and beginning to write? Now this is your second book, but was there a moment you look back on that was an inspiration moment, or was it just everything?
I talk about this in my book. When I was in prison, I was on a janitorial detail that we cleaned the warden's office, right? And in the warden's office was this big desk and this big conference table. And on that conference table were the files of inmates who were applying for temporary home furloughs. So when they, you know, the last stop was the warden. So I had applied for furlough many times. My situation was this: you're allowed, or it's not a right, it's a privilege. You're eligible for furloughs when you have half your minimum sentencing, right? By me having 10 to 20, I had half my sentencing at 5 years, but I still had 5 years to do. So I was kind of a risk because, you know, you're letting a guy out that still has 5 years to do. So I got turned down for furlough a lot. So sometimes when I was cleaning the office, my file would be on the warden's desk. And I couldn't resist. I had to take a peek at my file. But what I noticed when I looked at my file, every time I looked at my file, I got totally frustrated because the narrative was defining a person that was not me. It wasn't a person my family knew or my friends knew. Of course, it was defining someone who had zero humanity. And yes, the criminal acts were inhumane, I will admit, but the narrative was simply, when you put it this way, if I didn't know I was reading about myself, I would have locked that person up. Because there was no redeeming qualities within that narrative. So what that told me was, when you asked about writing my book, starting to write, what made me write, was that, number one, I wanted to control my own narrative. You know what I mean? I wanted people to understand that, you know, there's a myriad of things that happen in a person's life as they're evolving. You know what I mean? So, you know, that's why I used the butterfly, because who I was. Now, keep in mind, my case, when they discovered my case that I had been arrested, it was over 40-something years. It had happened when I was a teenager. So I was in my 60s or, yeah, I was in my 60s, I believe. Yeah, I was in my 60s because it was 2016 and I'm 71 now. So yeah, I was in my 60s. The case that I was arrested, I had been out of prison over 30 years, let alone the case. I did 10 years, so you add that 10 years. The case was literally 40-something years old when they discovered it. So in those 40 years between when it was discovered and when it happened, those 40 years didn't count no more. They went from that moment back to the case. So I think what not only was it about me controlling the narrative in my own life, it was about the fact that, you know, you can look at me as an individual, and it's, you know, a lot of people who have done well after being in prison, some people get an attaboy from the public, you know what I mean? But it's always individual stories, you know what I mean? I talk about Sean Robert Hopwood, who was on 60 Minutes. He was in jail. He became a jailhouse lawyer, and now he's a professor of law at Georgetown University. So those stories are told, but they're told individually. So you never actually get an idea of how many people are in our society. One of the chapters in my book is look to your left, look to your right. We are there. Your neighbor could be an ex-felon, right? So they're never told collectively. So you don't really understand that this is an actual community of people. And one of the common things they live with is the anxiety of being outed. Because again, what happened to me happens millions of times. It happens thousands of times, whatever, over and over. Because again, you're judged by what you did, not who you become. And who you were 40 years ago, 30 years ago, is definitely not necessarily the person you are today. Now, we do have a couple of lost causes. I'll be the first to admit, there were guys in prison that I hope never got out of prison. You know, but they were very few, because people don't understand even the whole makeup of being in prison. They think prison is like that HBO series Oz and all this violence and this and that other thing. But you have people, for the most part, you have people in here that situation has now impacted their life. So they want to change, you know, the people, places, and things that got them in that situation. Even if they're doing life, they don't want to do life as in the mindset that got them there, because they'll just go deeper and deeper into trouble. So that's basically what this book is about. It's about the eruption of possible means this. No matter what I did or who I was criminal-wise, once I discover my humanity, the limitations of what I can do are unlimited. You know what I mean? The things I can do are unlimited. The things I can accomplish are unlimited. So that's why I say what happens when a person is awakened, and they don't have to be ex-convict. They could be somebody who just the light bulb of life just turns on for them. And an eruption of possible comes because it's no telling what this person can accomplish in their lives. And not only what they can accomplish, who they can impact. You know what I mean? I'm probably more proud of the young men who I saved from going to jail than I am about anything I accomplished individually. You know what I mean? You know, when I look at, matter of fact, both my books were written. I used to coach basketball. I used to run a basketball program that was really a delinquency prevention program. It was really mentoring, but we used sports as a connector, right? Both of my forwards in my books are written by two of my former players. One is a vice president of the oldest bank in Virginia. One is a clinical psychologist. And these were kids that I met when they were 7, 8 years old. You know what I mean? I was able to, you know, amongst the other adults in our program, were able to guide these guys so that they didn't have the outcomes. And one of them grew up on the street that had crack houses on it. Every other house was a crack house. But now he's the vice president of the oldest bank, a senior vice president. I mean, he corrected me recently. A senior vice president of the oldest bank in Virginia. So, you know, that's kind of, if you want to call it in a nutshell, that's kind of what we're talking about. We're trying to bring to light that it's not just one guy here and one guy there that went to prison and came out and then, you know, turned good and blah, blah, blah. It's a whole community of people. And it's the biggest problem with that is not just those, but if I solve the riddle, if I understand this, you don't have criminal behavior or criminal acts without criminal thought. So if I understand how to change the criminal thought in my mind to change my life and change other lives, how effective would we be in the battle against crime and violence? You know what I mean? Especially gun violence. Because we're what I like to call myself, instead of an ex-con or ex-felon or whatever, or ex-offender, I'm a former practitioner of crime, of violence. I'm a former practitioner. You know, just like if a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, they're practitioners of their profession. Well, at one time, crime was my profession. So if I know what it took, the mental process, the thought process to break that chain of criminal thought, because you don't have criminal acts without criminal thinking. So, but because we have to hide as a community, we're never really used as contributors to solving this problem of crime and gun violence. So you have a whole community of people who've been through that process, been there, done that. And who would be more credible to young offenders than former offenders who are successful? And keep in mind, it's all about poverty and it's all about wanting to get out of poverty. So what that says is it's all about material things. You know, poverty is material. I may not have no money, but I'm not poor here. You follow what I'm saying? So when they can see examples of successful former ex-offenders successful in the professional world, what would be a better example for them? You know, because one of the things, I don't know how much of the streets you know, but one of the excuses young guys always use is, man, you don't know how it is in the streets. Well, you can't tell me that. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I did 10 years, but I was in the street 15 years, almost 15 years before I got arrested. You know, I mean, or at least 10. So, you know, we would be former practitioners of crime and violence would be a great resource in the fight against crime and violence.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a powerful book, and I totally agree. And you've talked about mentorship from the past, doing that with basketball, and just a powerful and a passion for you to invest in future generations. So I appreciate you. Thanks for taking time to have a conversation with us about his book. It's The Eruption of Possible, The Burst from the Limits of
Two bursts from the limits
of environment.
Right.
So The Eruption of Possible, To Burst from the Limits of Environment. Kevin, thanks for joining us. You can grab a copy of his book or his first book as well. It's available online through Amazon, through Barnes and Noble. Yeah.
Here it is. Eruption of Possible.
There you go. Well, thanks for joining us for a conversation, for sharing your story, your passion, for doing what you're doing to try and impact.
And it's not just my story. It's the millions of people who are out there doing positive things.
Yeah.
But suffering. I want to add this before I go.
Yep.
My friend I told you about with Nike Corporation, he has a book out called Jump, right? And it's amazing. He had migraine headaches all his life. When he finally wrote his book and got all that off his chest, his headaches went away.
Wow.
Because the anxiety that this guy was in the White House and the Secret Service, you know what I mean, had to question him. So here's a guy in the White House. What if he had got outed at the White House? You follow? That would have been on CNN and everything like that. So it's also breaking away from that anxiety that you live with, that one day, no matter what you build and do, it can be torn down because somebody found out about what you did.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Kevin. It was great to meet you. Great to talk with you. Thanks for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thank you.